All right, let's jump into something pretty cool today, huh? We're doing a deep dive into polyhouse farming in India. It's like, imagine if you're a farmer, right? You want to be growing crops all year round, no matter what the weather's doing, crazy heat, monsoons, whatever. Could this be the future of agriculture? That's what we're going to find out. We've got this awesome article from Agriplast Protected Cultivation. They're specialists in this polyhouse tech, so let's see what they have to say.
Yeah, it's amazing how polyhouse farming is basically like a greenhouse, but like on steroids, right? Taking that climate control to a whole other level.
Okay, I like the sound of anything on steroids, but
Yeah.
seriously, before we get too excited, tell me, what is a polyhouse exactly? This article describes it as like a galvanized iron skeleton, and then it's covered in this special UV stabilized polyfilm. Sounds a bit more advanced than just a regular greenhouse.
It is, yeah. It's all about precision,
Yeah.
like creating the perfect little microclimate for each crop so you can
Yeah.
control the temperature, the humidity, even how much light they get. It's pretty wild.
Hmm. So it's less about protection from the elements. It's more about creating the ideal growing environment, whatever's happening outside. And the article was saying that this polyfilm is way cheaper than using glass or other materials.
Yeah.
That's got to be a big deal for farmers, especially in India.
Huge. Making this technology affordable is like the key to it actually being used widely.
Hmm.
And, it's really interesting. Polyhouse farming seems like a really good fit for India with their unique agriculture.
Now that you mention it, this article keeps talking about India. Why is that?
Well, think about India's climate. It's all over the place, right? Deserts, rainforests, everything. So polyhouses let farmers create consistent growing conditions all year round, no matter where they are. Plus, there's this massive demand in India for high-quality produce, especially fruits and veggies that are out of season.
So you're not only making sure there's always a good supply of food, but you're also meeting the needs of those picky eaters who want fresh strawberries in December, right? And speaking of benefits, this article highlights some big ones. Higher yields, climate control, even vertical growing. Sounds impressive, but what does that actually look like in reality?
Okay, so imagine biting into a perfect strawberry, you know, juicy, bursting with flavor. And it doesn't even matter what time of year it is. That's the kind of quality control we're talking about here. By being able to control the light, temperature, humidity, polyhouses create those perfect conditions so everything tastes amazing and looks great.
Okay, you had me at delicious strawberries. But what about this fan pad system and the sensory devices they mentioned? It makes this whole thing sound super high tech.
Oh, it is. So these fan pad systems are cool.
Yeah.
Basically, they use a combo of fans and these evaporative pads to keep the temperature and humidity just right. It's like an air conditioning system for your plants, but way more fancy, obviously.
Hmm.
And the sensory devices, they keep an eye on everything, from the moisture in the soil to how many nutrients are in there. So the farmers have all this real-time data and can make decisions, based on what's actually happening.
So it's not just about creating a controlled environment, you're getting this constant feedback on the whole growing process. That's wild. And let's talk about vertical farming, because that blew my mind. The article uses cucumbers and tomatoes as examples. Imagining those vines just growing upwards, it's like a skyscraper made of plants.
Right. And it's crazy efficient, especially when there's not a lot of land to work with. Imagine how much you can grow per square foot when you build upwards. That's huge for cities or places where land is limited.
Makes a ton of sense. And then there's the biggest benefit, higher yields. That's got to be the farmer's dream, right? More crops. The article says polyhouse farming can seriously increase how much you can grow.
Yeah. And here's where things get interesting. Higher yields mean more income for the farmers,
Right.
and that can impact the whole community. Potentially, we could be lifting people out of poverty with this. And then from the consumer side, more produce means lower prices, which is super important in a country like India with so many people to feed.
So it's way more than just technology. It's about economics. It's about food security. This is a way bigger deal than I thought. Now, I was surprised to learn that there are different types of polyhouses. I thought they were all the same. The article mentioned two main categories, environmental control and construction type. Can you break that down for me?
Basically, think of it like a spectrum, right? You've got your basic ones, naturally ventilated. They rely on natural airflow and simple adjustments. And then at the other end, you've got the environmentally controlled polyhouses, fully automated with temperature and humidity control, and even artificial lighting, the whole shebang.
So like going from a bicycle to a Ferrari, basically?
Pretty much. And the article gave some good examples, like comparing basic structures made from bamboo to these high-tech systems. So choosing the right type depends on your budget, what you're growing, and how much control you want to have over the environment.
Right. Makes sense. Speaking of budget, let's talk money. The article breaks down the costs. but it's a pretty big range. What's it going to cost someone who's just starting out with this?
Well, imagine the cost of a really basic polyhouse being about the same as buying a used car. It's an investment, for sure, but it's achievable for a lot of farmers. And then, if you think about the potential profit, the article mentions it could be between 8 and 20 lakhs per acre every year.
Whoa, hold on. 8 to 20 lakhs. That's life-changing money. Makes those upfront costs seem a lot less scary all of a sudden.
Yeah, it's serious potential return on investment, and it
Yeah.
really shows how valuable polyhouse farming can be. Plus, you can grow so much variety. Exotic fruits, off-season veggies, flowers. There's a market for just about anything.
So you're not limited by your region anymore. You can basically create this perfect agricultural oasis and just control every single part of it. This really is starting to sound like the future of farming.
And speaking of location, choosing the right spot for your polyhouse is super important. Just like with any real estate, it can really make or break your success.
Okay, so what are the things to consider? The article talked about pollution levels, water stagnation, and making sure it's easy to get to. Sounds like a checklist for finding polyhouse paradise.
And for good reason. Those things have a big impact on your plants. Pollution can mess with their growth, water stagnation can damage the roots, and obviously you need to be able to get supplies in and your produce out to market.
It's amazing. I'm starting to see how every detail matters. The type of polyhouse, the location, it all plays a part in making the most of it. This is a whole different way of thinking about farming.
Yeah, it's about that level of control and precision, right?
Ah,
That's why polyhouse farming could be a real solution for food security issues. Not just in India, but all over the world.
wow, that's an interesting thought. If you can grow anything anywhere, that opens up a lot of possibilities. We could be farming in the desert, on rooftops, anything.
Exactly. Imagine fresh produce being grown locally in places that have always struggled to grow food. Polyhouses could change everything.
It's like something out of a sci-fi movie. And it's pretty cool that India is kind of leading the way, adopting this new tech.
Definitely. There are always challenges, of course, but the benefits of polyhouse farming are huge. We're talking more food, better quality, less need for pesticides, and being able to grow crops all year round. It's a win-win for everyone involved.
Okay, so for someone listening who's now totally into this idea of polyhouse farming, what are the key things they should take away from this?
I think the biggest takeaway is that polyhouse farming is a whole new way of thinking about agriculture. It's about control, precision, and doing things sustainably. Using technology to grow more, but with less impact on the environment.
It's like we're taking the best of nature and combining it with what humans are good at to create a system that works better.
Exactly. And that's super important as the climate changes and the population keeps growing. Polyhouses give us a way to adapt to those challenges and make sure everyone has access to food.
So it's not just about growing more, it's about growing smarter, being adaptable.
Absolutely. It's about empowering farmers, giving them more control, breaking free from the old ways of doing things. It's a more secure future for them.
And it goes beyond the farmers themselves, right? This could change entire communities, bring new life to rural economies.
For sure. It's about creating a positive ripple effect. More income for farmers means better education, healthcare, infrastructure. It benefits the whole community.
It's like planting seeds of hope, not just for the crops, but for the people who rely on them.
And honestly, I think that's the most inspiring thing about polyhouse farming. It connects us back to the land, reminds us how important agriculture is, and empowers us to create a better future.
Well said. So we've been talking about this article from Agriplast Protected Cultivation. They seem like the experts on this stuff. I bet their website has a ton of info for anyone who wants to learn more.
Yeah, they're a great resource, and I'd encourage our listeners to think about the bigger picture here. If we can grow food anywhere, what does that mean for how we feed the world? Could we solve problems like hunger in food deserts? What about the environmental impact of traditional farming?
Those are some big questions, but that's how we come up with new ideas and solutions.
Exactly. And maybe that's the most important takeaway from all of this. Polyhouse farming isn't just a way to grow plants. It's a way to rethink how we produce food and create a more sustainable world.
That's a great point to leave our listeners with. And as always, keep learning, keep asking questions, and stay curious about the world. See you next time.
You know, it's kind of amazing to think that something as simple as like a structure covered in plastic could have such a big impact on the world.
Yeah, it really shows you what we can do when we get creative. Working with nature to solve these huge problems we're facing.
What I find interesting is that this isn't just about technology. It's about understanding how plants work, what they need to thrive. It's like We're creating these little havens for them.
Yeah, exactly. And by giving them those perfect conditions, not only do we get more crops, but the quality is better too.
Hmm.
Think about eating a tomato that tastes like it was just picked perfectly ripe and full of flavor.
Okay, now I'm getting hungry.
Yeah.
But yeah, that connection between controlled environments and better quality is fascinating. It's like we're taking out all the uncertainty, making agriculture more predictable and reliable. And that predictability is so important, especially with the climate being so unpredictable these days. Polyhouses give farmers a way to protect their crops no matter what crazy weather comes along and make sure they have a good harvest.
So it's not just about more food, it's about making the whole system stronger, less vulnerable to the ups and downs of nature.
Right. It's about giving farmers more control, helping them break free from those old ways of farming and create a better future.
And it's not just the farmers, is it? This could have a huge impact on whole communities, bring new life to rural areas.
Absolutely. More money for farmers means better schools, healthcare, infrastructure for everyone.
It's like we're planting seeds of hope, not just for the plants, but for the people, too.
And I think that's what makes polyhouse farming so inspiring. It reminds us how important agriculture is and shows us that we have the power to create a more sustainable future.
Absolutely. Well, this has been a really eye-opening deep dive into polyhouse farming. As we wrap things up, what's the one thing you want our listeners to remember?
I want them to feel that sense of wonder, that feeling that anything is possible. Polyhouse farming shows us what we can achieve with innovation. It's a reminder that even when things seem impossible, there's always a way forward.
It's about challenging those old ideas, pushing the boundaries, believing in our ability to create a better world.
Exactly. So next time you're enjoying a fresh meal, think about where that food came from and all the work that went into it. And consider the possibilities that technologies like polyhouse farming hold for the future of food.
That's a great note to end on. Thanks for joining us today and sharing your expertise. And to our listeners, keep exploring, keep learning, and never lose that curiosity. Until next time.